Today is April 17th, 2014, and my name is Avi Edwards. Today I'm interviewing Maria Krenz, who was born approximately 70 years ago in Hungary as a Jew, raised as a Catholic, and is now actively practicing Quaker. She's written a beautiful book called Made in Hungary, and today she's here just to tell us some of her story. The interview is being recorded for Maria Rogers Oral History Program and for the Jewish Oral History Project, whose mission is to document the Jewish life and the life of Jews in mid-20th century Boulder, a time when there was an influx of Jews that first created a sustained Jewish community in Boulder. The interview is being filmed by MROHP. Okay, Maria, we're going to start with the most basic of all questions, which is, when and where were you born?
Budapest, Hungary, April 24, 1944.
Okay, and how much of your life did you spend in Hungary? Did you grow up there?
Yes, the first 13.5 years.
Can you describe to us a bit about your family, the neighborhood you grew up in?
Well, I was born in the middle of the Holocaust and was hiding for the first year. My parents and I were hiding the first year, and my family, both my parents came from Jewish families, and but my mother's father actually converted them to Catholicism after World War I because they thought that there would be danger, and there was. But my father just converted before the Holocaust, and always at home did a little bit of celebration, which my mother didn't like, but our
a little bit of celebration
of a Jewish holidays, a commemoration that this is the day, and he was always sad. My family, both my parents were college educated and professionals. My mother taught English. That's how she met my father. The neighborhood we lived in was in the outskirts of Buda, so it was nice. There were smaller houses. We lived in a house of 7 apartments. And my parents decided, after we survived, that nobody should know that, that we were Jewish, and the neighborhood we lived in. Later on I found out there were other Jews, but everybody was hiding the fact that they were Jews.
Can you just tell a little bit more about where you were hiding and the experience of hiding that way?
Well, if you believe that what happens to you in uterus matters, then fear was the most prevalent emotion that I came to life with, and my mother was just terrified. We were hiding in different places, once in a top floor, in a hidden room of a house, so that all the bombings, we could not go to the air raid shelter. And once we were almost discovered, that's a story in itself, if you want me to tell it.
Yes, please.
They came and they said that we heard that there are Jews here. You know, I was a baby and my mother was totally frantic of me not making noise so someone doesn't hear. But anyway, we were, and there came 3 Hungarian Nazis, thugs, and said there is Jews living here, and they found us. And so they asked for the papers. And since my parents did convert, they had papers of baptism. However, what saved us was that these thugs were totally uneducated and couldn't read, because the date of the baptism and the date of birth were way over. So that's how we were saved there. But then we had to find another place because it was clear that someone else is going to come. So that kind of atmosphere is what the first year of my life and my poor parents' life was. And my mother never recovered emotionally. My father died when I was 6, so that was just my mother and I. And
you had no brothers or sisters?
I had 2 half-sisters, but they were grown and living on their own by then.
They were from...
My father was a widow, quite a bit older than my mother. But so my mother managed to function, but emotionally couldn't. It just relived it constantly. It's like it was happening every day.
She actually spoke of it, or
yes.
You could just sense it in her way of being?
She sat me down and told me the story over and over and over again, to the point where I couldn't separate whether it was my story or hers.
And she would relive the almost being found and the bombing.
All of it, the whole story.
So, after the war, did you continue living in Hungary?
Yes, lived in Hungary, and we were actually lucky because our apartment wasn't ransacked. You know, they threw us out of our apartment when I was 1 week old, and I was a preemie. But apparently the people who ended up were one of those few decent ones, and so our apartment was okay, and we just moved back to the apartment. But at that point, they changed their name from Fleischl to Felhős, which was a Hungarian name, and nobody was supposed to know.
So your parents changed the name?
Changed, yeah.
And mine, say it again?
Course, from Fleischl to Felhős.
Felhős.
Yeah.
Which was
a Hungarian name.
Hungarian name. Felhős. And how did you get the name Krenz?
I got married.
Okay, that's it. That's the usual way. Got it. Okay, so when it was just your mother and you, did you continue practicing Catholicism?
Yes. And that was another irony because, well, first of all, I knew, because of my mother's stories, I knew from day one that we were Jewish,
right,
and that nobody could know about the fact that we were Jewish, so I couldn't talk about it.
To anyone?
To anyone other than the family. And, but then the Soviets came. They liberated us, they saved our lives, but then they stayed. And then even being a Catholic was not permissible, or practicing Catholic was not permissible if you wanted to have a job. So then there were both things to be hidden, and my mother wouldn't come. We lived opposite to a church, and my mother wouldn't come, but sent me to go to Mass and so forth, with the idea that that would be okay, because they can't blame her for that, since everybody around was going. They were all Catholics. That part of Hungary was purely Catholic.
So you were hiding being Jewish and hiding being Catholic?
Correct.
And what was that like for a little girl?
Very confusing.
Can you say more about that?
Well, it's kind of living in kind of feeling unsafe all the time is really what it was like.
Did you have good friends?
I played with the children in the building some, and I had one dear friend with whom I went from first grade until I left Hungary.
What's her name?
Etta.
Etta?
Etelka, but we called her Etta.
Etta? And did you have to hide even with her?
Yes. Which was very funny because we met again after a 15-year hiatus.
15 or 50?
50, 50.
50.
And at that point I knew that I couldn't be friends with her if this was a barrier. So I told her, and she just looked at me and said, I always knew you were Jewish. It's just like, you know, we were all hiding it. It was like living inauthentically and in fear.
Inauthentically and in fear. Was she Jewish?
No.
No. Where is she now?
She lives in Hungary.
She still lives in Hungary.
Yeah.
And have you been back to Hungary?
Oh, many times. Many times. The last time was to meet with her, and I will never go back again.
And why is that?
Because since 2010, the ultra-right party got 50% of the votes, and the neo-Nazi got 20% of the votes. So my parents were right. It will never end in Hungary. And in the 2014 elections, they increased to 23%.
Okay, Lynn, let's take you from Hungary now. You said you were in Hungary for 13 and a half years. The exact age that my mother was when she left Czechoslovakia. And where did you go from Hungary? And why? What was the what had your mother have the, I don't know, courage, wherewithal to leave Hungary?
Well, that's a good question. At that time, under the Soviet system, well, under the Hungary of the Soviet system, they wanted to give a chance for education to those people who wouldn't have had it otherwise, whose parents were not educated. And that included high school, because there was real scarcity of places and teachers. So I wasn't going to be able to go to high school.
Because your parents were educated.
Right. So my aunt, my mother's sister, really pushed us to go away, which after the revolution, that was in October 1956, things were a little bit easier and you could leave under certain circumstances. Anyway, but the US was not taking refugees anymore, so we ended up in Venezuela, where my father had a cousin.
Venezuela. And what was life like in Venezuela?
Not good. You know, my mother wanted to continue being a Catholic. She really was a real believer.
Yeah.
And we went, and there were so many Hungarians that there was one mass in Caracas every Sunday that was in Hungarian. And so we went there, and the priest started to preach anti-Semitism from the pulpit, and so we never went back. But we weren't practicing Jews, so we didn't belong to that community either. And the Venezuelan natives, Venezuelans in general, didn't really relate much with the foreigners. So it was not a great life for a teenager.
And how long did you stay there?
7 years.
7 not very happy years.
Correct.
Were there any good spots, any bright spots?
Oh, I'm sure they were, but from this distance I tend to remember the bad ones.
And what had you leave Venezuela then?
Oh, we always wanted to come to the States, but actually when I got my first vacation from working. I had to go work very early because my mother was sick. We came to the U.S. because my mother's oldest sister and youngest aunt lived in the States. And at that point, I was still always homesick. And when we landed at that time Idlewild Airport, it was spring, and it just felt, the air felt like in Hungary. And it wasn't the tropics. So I just said right then and there, I don't take what it cares. I don't care what it takes. I am moving to the States. And, God helped me. Because that was a time when Johnson changed the quota rules, President Johnson. So
the quota rules?
Quota, because there were only so many Hungarians allowed, so we would, there was a long wait. Changed the rules, and in 10 months, we came to the States.
God bless Lyndon Johnson.
For many things, actually, except for the Vietnam War.
Yes, exactly. He's recently been all over the news. So you came to New York.
Right.
And how did you end up in Boulder, Colorado?
Well, the university. I came as an undergraduate in 1968 and never left.
How did you happen to end up at, is it CU?
Mm-hmm.
How did you happen to end up at CU?
Well, I got married in New York, and my husband's specialty that he was studying, he was told that there's a really good, that there was a really good public administration department at that point within the political science department.
How old were you when you got married?
Don't ask me. The first time, 22.
22, and you had not yet been to college?
Oh, yeah. I started college at City College in New York,
okay.
And during the day, and went to the university at night. So I started it there, and then continued in Boulder.
How did you meet your husband?
We worked in the same bank.
Was he Jewish?
No.
At this point in your life, were you practicing Judaism? Were you practicing Catholicism? Had you given it all up?
I was not practicing
anything at all. Were you?
My first husband never knew I was Jewish.
I was just going to ask.
Because my mother was totally convinced that it's never safe, no matter where we live. The first time I admitted somebody was my second husband that I was Jewish. I was 27 years old.
Can you just say a little bit more about that? How did that come to be?
Not well, I just, at that point I met the Quakers, and for the first time I did feel safer. My second husband is a Quaker, my ex-husband. And it was a safe environment. So I didn't feel that I was, it didn't make sense to me any longer.
And do you remember the experience of finally coming out?
Still was with precipitation. I never trusted anyone not Jewish that they were not anti-Semitic, because that's what I was taught, that everybody is.
What was your second husband's reaction?
He thought Jews were smart, so it was okay to be Jewish. Life is funny and ironic.
And did you have children with
yes,
either of the husbands?
The second husband. I have a son.
You have a son. And did you raise him in any faith?
Quaker.
Quaker.
Yeah, I became a Quaker then.
So you became a Quaker, and you've remained a practicing Quaker for how many years is that now?
71, started in 71, so that's 43 years.
And how old is your son now?
40.
He is 40. And congratulations.
Thank
Is he, does he practice Quakerism? Does he consider himself Jewish? How does he identify?
He's an atheist. He's a biologist, and they often are. But his values are, I can say, either Quaker or Jewish, because both are true, and he's very aware that he comes from a Jewish family on his mother's side.
So if people ask him, are you Jewish, he would say yes?
That's interesting. I don't know, but I mean, he's very aware.
And when you came to Boulder, so the year is now, what's the year?
1968.
1968, a critical year historically, that's for sure. Did you at all participate in the Jewish community, or you were totally in the Quaker community?
Well, yeah, I was totally in the Quaker community, but my best friend in the Quaker community was Jewish. Yeah, there were, I think at that time there were 7 Jews in the meeting.
And you were very aware of who was Jewish?
Absolutely. Over my life.
You're always aware of who is Jewish and who is not Jewish. How would you say that in terms of your own Jewish identity, say since 1968, how has that evolved for you?
Mm-hmm. Slowly. Well, let me start by saying that I always felt in every cell of my body that I was Jewish. I think the most important part of my life and of my sense of identity was always the fact that I was Jewish. But I ran from it because I was so much taught and experienced that being Jewish is dangerous, until I got together with my partner, who very wisely convinced me that you can't run away from it, you have to face it. And we went to Hungary and Prague and Austria, and we went to every Holocaust museum. And the great synagogue of Hungary, which was the second largest of Europe, still stood, and we found out, we went on a tour. There was a guide and told the story of the synagogue and pointed to the balcony and said, the building stands because that was Eichmann's office, and all the floor of the huge synagogue was a collecting point for going to the trains. And my partner started sobbing, just sobbing. And she was the first non-Jewish person that I felt really cared and really, truly was not anti-Semitic. And that's when I decided that maybe I survived because I needed to witness to what happened. And that was the beginning of the project of writing my book. And that was my liberation, the start of my liberation. And it was precipitous. You know, I wrote the book, it came out, well, I wrote the book it came out 5 years after I started writing, but it was Holocaust week, and Catherine Bernheimer, but actually my first time I talked about the book was at the JCC at the request of Catherine, and I was terrified because I thought that the Jews will reject me for not being a practicing Jew. You see, this was all kind of, I mean, in a way I was an innocent, but they were so wonderful and kind. And then Catherine asked me to speak at Holocaust Week at CU, which I did. And the reporter just happened to be there for that talk. You know, there were so many talks. And it appeared in the paper. Big article appeared in the paper. So talking about coming out, I really came out. And then, you know, slowly I just realized that I really wanted to regain, to reclaim my heritage. And I started by studying, auditing courses at CU in the Jewish Studies department. And every time I did anything more and found out more, I wanted to find out more. And so I met Rabbi Ruth Gelfarb, whose husband and I were friends before they got married. And she suggested, she invited me to Rosh Hashanah, and no, actually it was Sukkot. And when we were talking, she suggested that I take the Melton courses. And, you know, that, because in the CU courses I learned the history and I took a course in philosophy of Judaism, but in the Melton courses I learned really the holidays, the rituals, the evolution of thought about it from the Bible, from the Torah to today's thinking. And and 2.5 years ago I went to Israel, and that totally radicalized me. So I don't know that I can ever go regularly to a Jewish synagogue. I cannot say prayers I don't believe in that make me uncomfortable. So I think I will be always a practicing Quaker, because it's the fact that they don't require for me to say anything. But I am really out Jewish, and I'm proud of it.
Well, as you know, I've had a somewhat of a similar story, and I have the same sort of experience. Very, very, very proud of it. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the experience of writing the book? Because I've said to you, I read it myself, and I was amazed, first of all, how beautifully written it is, but also the details that you remember, like how incredibly you bring everything to life. What was that process like for you?
I realized afterwards only that I carried all this. You know, I left when I was a teenager, and at that point I thought that I will never be able to go back. And somehow I had to carry this. This was, you know, this was my identity. This was the most important year of my life, my first one, in a way. So I had to carry it. And then I went back, and after we were in Budapest and decided to write the book, went back and did an enormous amount of research too, because my mother just had one piece, and I wanted the whole picture. And And then I wrote it over probably 3 years, 3.5 years, because it got very intense, and then I would stop for a month or two, and then I would start again. I knew that, I knew that I wouldn't stop forever, but I just had to have a breather from it. And once the book was written, it was so cathartic. It was like I could take it off my shoulders. So it was, besides the fact that I know many, many people have read it, and I kind of have fulfilled my promise of witness, it also was really, really good for me.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. Right now, in terms of your, what I sort of think of, I love the idea of reclaiming your Jewish roots. I know you're in the Melton class because that's where I know you from. Are there other ways in which you plan to continue the journey? Is it wide open? What's next?
It's one step at a time. I don't know what's next. I'm going to take the second year of the Melton classes too. I know that. And I know that I will go sometimes to Har Hashem or to Neve Kodesh. I want to go back to Israel and spend at least a month in Israel. Not sightseeing, but settled, probably in Jerusalem, and just live there. It's also, it was partly so interesting because it's so secular. So, and everybody around me was Jewish, but yet, it wasn't. I wasn't rejected. I didn't feel rejected because I wasn't practicing Jewish. And, I went to Yad Vashem, and I think that's the last Holocaust museum I'm going to go to, because every time it feels like I'm going to die. But went to so many places, and it felt so, I went to the wall, and all the places, and it was so clear. It was clear and finally peaceful of who I was. And I don't know where it's going to lead. I am open.
Thank you, Maria. Is there anything else that you would like us to know about you and your remarkable life as a Jewish Catholic practicing Quaker?
No, not really.
Okay, thank you so much. Really, thank you so much.